So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Before we get into this video, I do just want to give a warning right in the beginning. I'm not going to give another warning throughout this video, so this is your warning that this case is about a child and it involves domestic abuse of both a child and in a relationship. So if any of that is triggering to you, click out of this video now. No worries, there should be another one up on my channel very soon. You can watch the last video I uploaded. That one didn't involve any themes of children or domestic abuse. But yeah, that's the only warning that I'm going to give in this video, so feel free to click out. But if not, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is made for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So today we're going to be talking about a girl named Judith Barsi. She was a 10-year-old rising Hollywood star that I think quite a lot of you might recognise. Maybe not like visually recognized, but you might recognize her work, especially if you're an 80s 90s baby. If you're like my age or older, you will probably have watched some of the things that Judith is in. So Judith Eva Barsi was born on June 6th, 1978 in Los Angeles, California, to her parents Maria and Jozsef. Maria and Jozsef were both Hungarian immigrants that fled to the US separately following the 1956 Soviet occupation, and the two of them met at a bar in Los Angeles. Maria was a waitress at this bar and it was frequented by a lot of immigrants. It was immigrant run and Maria knew all the regulars and whatever, and then suddenly this guy comes in that she's never met before and he seems amazing. He's confident, he's loud, he seems rich. He pays for pretty much all his drinks with $100 bills, which is not seen that often in this bar. And Maria was single and she was looking to start a family very soon. And I'm not saying that she was looking to marry into wealth, but if you're wanting kids and you're wanting a good life for your kids, and this man seems like he can provide that, she was very attracted to him. And this seemingly rich, confident, powerful, loud man was Jozsef, and he'd taken a liking to Maria as well. He liked that they were both from Hungary, so they had that in common, they had a lot in common, but they were also just very different from each other in the upbringings that they had in Hungary. Maria had grown up quite wealthy. She was born into wealth, not like ultimately rich, but she'd had a very good upbringing, very comfortable. She had everything she ever wanted. Whereas Jozsef was the complete opposite. His family was very poor, they didn't live in a very nice area. And Jozsef had a hard life before he met Maria, not just because he was from a poor family, but because he was tormented at school as well. For a multitude of reasons, partly because they were poor, but partly because his father wasn't in the picture, and the children at school used to make fun of him for that, for not having a dad. And this really got to Jozsef. He had really low self-esteem from that point on for the rest of his life. He would often turn to alcohol at times of distress to comfort him. I don't think he was ever an alcoholic. Like, I don't think it ever turned into an addiction, but just a very unhealthy coping mechanism. When Jozsef left school, he never really had any like major ambitions. He just kind of went into the first career that presented itself, and that was to be his life. When he fled Hungary, he originally went to France, and then he went to New York, and then he was in Arizona for a little bit, and then he eventually settled in Los Angeles, which is where he was fated to meet Maria. The two of them fell in love and got married in 1977, and very quickly and somewhat unexpectedly, they started a family. Maria discovered that she was pregnant shortly after the wedding, and on June 6th of 1978, Judith Eva Barsi was born. She was their only child, but she was their absolute pride and joy. Like, especially Maria, she was so excited to have a little girl, like a little mini-me that she could dress up and do her hair and everything. Well, I say Judith was their only child. She was Maria's only child. However, Jozsef had two other children to a previous marriage that we'll get more into in a minute, but they were living in a different state. So for all intents and purposes, in this household, it was just Jozsef, Maria and Judith. Judith was known to be a very kind-hearted, very sweet little girl. Her neighbours actually described her as having the manners of an angel. Her favourite colours were pink and purple. Her favourite flower was a sunflower. She loved Cabbage Patch dolls. She loved Care Bears. She loved the Smurfs. Her favourite pastime activity was playing outside. She just just loved being out in the sun. It was always very good weather where they lived, and she just loved being out there. She made friends on her street when they eventually moved to a house. In the first half of her life, they lived in a very small apartment. Their family was not well off at all. But once they moved to a bigger house and she had a garden and she made friends and stuff, her and her friend used to love going out and playing under the sprinklers in the gardens. They used to put their little swimsuits on and just like run through the sprinklers. So something about Maria, Judith's mother, is that she always wanted to be an actress or a celebrity just in general. She just loved everything about that, about Hollywood, about like the celebrity lifestyle, as a lot of people do. I think a lot of people want to be rich and famous. However, at this point, she kind of realised that that ship had sailed for her. She'd had a baby, she had responsibilities, she had, you know, a husband. Not that a husband would stop her, but you know what I mean. She'd kind of cemented her life in what it was, and she felt like it was too late for her to go and try and do that herself. And Jozsef had made it very clear to Maria that he wanted her to be a stay-at-home mother, like a housewife. And she was happy to do so, rather than go out and get a job and Judith be somewhere else during the day, like with someone looking after her. She would much prefer to be at home with her daughter. However, Maria saw opportunity in Judith. Judith could be trained to be the perfect little actress. And so during the day, because she wasn't working, she began training Judith to be a little Hollywood superstar. And so from the age of 5, Maria would give Judith kind of acting lessons, singing lessons. She would help her pronounce her words. She would help her with her posture and with her dancing and stuff like that. And I don't want that to come across in like an abusive way. As far as I could tell, Judith really enjoyed doing this. She was never forced to do anything. I just don't want it to come across as though Maria was a very like controlling mother that forced Judith to do all this, because I really don't think that was the case. And people would tell Maria like, it's really unlikely that Judith is ever going to make it. The chances are 1 in a million of someone becoming an actor or, you know, a superstar. But Maria really thought that her daughter had something special. And she was right. Judith's big break came when she was just 5 years old. The family was out at an ice skating rink, and it just so happened that a TV crew was there on the same day shooting a commercial. One of the casting directors that was working with the TV crew spotted Judith and thought that she was perfect for another commercial. So this casting director went over to talk with the family, and they got Judith an agent that same day or the day after. And she got that commercial that the casting director was casting for. It was for Donald Duck orange juice, and Judith did such a good job that they actually brought her back in for repeat commercials with that same brand.
Ever since Mom and Dad found out that Donald Duck is 100% pure orange juice, oh, please. We don't know what to do with them anymore.
And these commercials just completely opened the doors for Judith to a potentially very long and fruitful career in acting. She landed over 70 different roles in TV shows and films and commercials, which we'll get into more in a second. By the age of 7 years old, Judith Barsi was making over $100,000 a year. And this extra income every year allowed the family to move from that very small apartment that they were living in to a 3-bedroom house in Los Angeles, in a really nice suburb. And everyone was just very happy. Judith was very happy with her job, Jozsef was happy, Maria was happy being a show mum. So Judith Barsi's first TV role was in a TV series called Fatal Vision, and she followed that up with a bunch more promising performances in a bunch of other things. She was in The Twilight Zone, Punky Brewster, Cagney and Lacey, Growing Pains, Saint Elsewhere. She was in so many that I'm not just going to sit here and list them off. But the 3 roles that Judith Barsi is probably best known for are, first of all, her role in Jaws the Revenge. She played a little girl named Thea Brody.
Where's the lady who brings the soda? They had them on the big plane.
There's some coffee in the thermos.
I'm too young for coffee.
Oh.
Can I drive?
And the other 2, her other 2 biggest roles that she ever had were actually voice acting roles, which is why I said you might not recognise her, but you might know her work. She was in The Land Before Time, that dinosaur movie, and she voiced Ducky.
I am not a long neck, I'm a big mouth. But I am all alone, I am. Oh, yes, 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 I do.
And she was also in All Dogs Go to Heaven, where she voiced a girl called Anne-Marie.
Charlie, will I ever see you again?
Sure. You know, goodbyes aren't forever.
Then, goodbye, Charlie. I love you.
And between all of those roles in TV shows and films, Judith was also just in a lot of commercials. She did commercials for McDonald's, Lay's, Jif peanut butter, Campbell's soup. She was actually very, very tiny for her age, was Judith, which made her very in demand because she was 5, but she had the stature of a 3-year-old. So obviously when you're looking to cast the role of a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old that looks 3 is going to have a lot more understanding and a lot better acting skills, most likely, than an actual 3-year-old. At one point, Judith was actually put on hormone treatment at a university. I don't think it really did anything. She was just very tiny all her life. When she was 10, she was still playing parts of like 6, 7-year-olds. So, I mean, I suppose it did well for her career, but she was just a very tiny little girl.
Can I do something? Anna, come back here. No, Liz, I like Punky. I want to help her.
So Judith is becoming more and more successful. She's earning more and more money. Her and her mother are travelling the world for these parts. However, at this point, her father Joseph was becoming quite bitter about his daughter's success. Of course, this was a 6, 7, 8-year-old girl that was earning way more than he ever has in his life. I think Judith made him feel very unsuccessful, and he was very bitter about that, and this bitterness started coming out in little snappy comments. He started being kind of mean to his daughter. One of their neighbours has actually told a story about one time when Judith was out in the garden with a kite. She must have been quite loud, or, you know, as kids are. When they're playing outside, they're loud. And Joseph storms out of the house, walks up to Judith and grabs this kite from the air and pulls it down. And Judith starts crying, saying, "No, you're going to break it, like, be careful." And Joseph turns to Maria, who was also in the garden, and says, "Look, she's a spoilt brat, she won't share her toys." And so to teach her a lesson, he grabs this kite and breaks it into pieces in front of Judith. And the neighbours had always had a funny feeling about Jozsef Barsi. As soon as they moved into this house, he got a big kind of spiked fence put up around the property, which was odd because none of the houses there really had fences. Like I said, this was a very safe, very nice area of Los Angeles, and no one, I don't know, why do you need a spiked fence outside your house? And with this bitterness over Judith's career, Joseph began drinking quite heavily. He was arrested on multiple occasions for driving under the influence, and he just never learned from that. And then he would come home from these drunken nights at the bar and just take out his frustrations on his wife and daughter. Mainly on his wife, Maria. He was just a very aggressive drunk, not necessarily violent, but just very aggressive, very loud, very angry, just not nice to be around. But had there been any warning signs that Joseph would turn out like this? And this was the first time she'd seen him like this. Bear in mind they'd been married for at least 5 years and been in a relationship for a year before that. She'd never seen him like this. And she'd never seen any warning signs before, but that's because he left that part of him and that part of his life in a different state when he moved to Los Angeles. Maybe had she known his past and his aggressiveness, maybe she wouldn't have fallen in love with him, maybe she wouldn't have got married to him, and maybe she wouldn't have had a baby with him. His old friends that he had in New York knew him to be quite an aggressive guy, especially after he'd had a drink. He was always getting into bar fights. At one point he was temporarily blind in one eye from a bar fight, and he would just pick fights with people in these bars. It wasn't like it was a long-going feud or whatever. Didn't matter who it was, didn't matter what they'd done, he just wanted to fight. He just liked arguing, he just liked causing a scene, and he would just do it for no reason. So like I said, Maria wasn't Joseph's first wife. So when he first left Hungary, he fled to France, where he met his first wife, Clara, who was also another Hungarian immigrant that had fled to France. The two of them ended up moving to New York together to start a life and start a family, and the two of them had 2 children. And again, this relationship became abusive, but in a very similar way to the one with Maria. It was very gradual, to the point where they don't even realise that it's getting abusive until it's like, badly abusive, you know? At first it was just like snappy comments and stuff like that, and then it led to actual aggressiveness and then actual violence. It was particularly bad when he would drink. So when Clara first realised that this relationship was getting abusive, she still didn't really want to leave Jozsef because she wanted that family unit for her children. However, the focus of the abuse gradually moved from Clara onto their children, and that was when Clara knew that she had to take these kids and get away from Jozsef and start a new life with the children. He would threaten to burn the house down with all 4 of them in it, and at this point their children were getting a little bit older. They were like teenagers, and Clara would express to her own daughter, who was in her early teens, that she was scared of her father and that she was scared that he was going to kill them all. So Clara took the children and took them to Arizona, away from Jozsef. And he actually followed them there, and he was begging Clara for a second chance, like he was going to change, he was going to stop drinking, but Clara knew that he wasn't, and she knew that this had gone too far. And when it finally got to the point where Jozsef accepted that there was nothing that he could do and that Clara was never going to back down and take him back, he got violent. He threw a cast iron pan at Clara's face and left her with a huge black eye, and then decided that he would restart a life for himself in Los Angeles, away from his past. So when he moved to Los Angeles and he met Maria, all of his past and his reputation and everything was behind him. He could completely reinvent himself. He was no longer that guy that fought people in the bar. He was no longer the man that beat his wife. He was confident, loud, wealthy Jozsef. He was very, very good at hiding it, and Maria herself was pretty vulnerable when it came to male figures in her life. She'd been abused in the past, I believe, by her own father. She probably also wasn't as likely to pick up on the warning signs as other people, because this was stuff that she was used to. This was stuff that she'd grown up around. Jozsef even said so blatantly to his friends stuff like, "I'm gonna kill that whore, one of these days I'm gonna kill her," and his friends just kind of brushed it off. They never took him seriously because he said this stuff so often that they just thought it was a very exaggerated comment made in anger. You know, like when you're having an argument with someone and you're like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna kill him." That's what they thought it was. They never thought that there was any truth behind that. But things just kept getting worse and worse and even more serious. On occasion, he even took Maria to their garage at the house where they lived, and he showed her this extensive collection of like jerry cans of gasoline that he'd been saving, and he said, "If you ever try and leave me, I'm gonna burn the house down with all 3 of us in it," to like scare Maria into staying with him, because he knew that he was abusive and he knew that she didn't want to be with him. He would threaten Maria with a lot of different things, to be honest, saying that he would kill her, that he would kill himself, that he would kill all 3 of them. He even said a few times that he would kill himself and Judith and leave Maria alive to suffer without them. And it's not even like Maria was secretive about this with her friends. Like, she would tell them how much of a bad person Jozsef was, and that he was aggressive and violent when he was drunk, and that he would threaten her all these times. Jozsef actually missed Judith's 8th birthday party. They like hired out a bowling alley, and she had loads of friends from school there, loads of home friends, loads of like other mums were there. And when the mums realised that Judith's father wasn't there, they asked Maria like, "Oh, where's Jozsef?" And she said, "Oh, he stayed at home to get drunk," instead of coming to his daughter's 8th birthday party. And because Maria would say these things so often, her friends never thought too much into it. I think it was one of those situations where people talk about something really, really deep, but they make such kind of casual comments about it that you don't think it bothers them too much, if you know what I mean. I think it was one of those situations, and so Maria's friends never really tried to help her or kind of push her to get help herself. In December of 1986, when Judith was 8 years old, her mother Maria made her first police report against her husband Jozsef Barsi, saying that he physically abused her. Police arrived at the house, and Maria told them this story about how Jozsef had punched her in the face and choked her and strangled her. However, police found no evidence of this. Now, I don't know what no evidence means. Like, there just wasn't marks on Maria, I suppose. But either way, as soon as police were there, Maria decided to drop charges against Jozsef and said, oh no, it doesn't matter, just, you know, leave us, we can deal with this. After this incident, Jozsef supposedly stopped drinking. I mean, he'd been in trouble with police quite a few times for his like drunk driving, and now this, that I think he kind of realised and stopped drinking. However, even though the drinking stopped, the abuse continued and actually got worse. So Jozsef, of course, being a very controlling husband, would open all of Maria's mail and read it before he would give it to her and give her a chance to read it. And this one time, Maria received a letter from her family back in Hungary. And this letter was informing her that one of her immediate family members had passed away and that there was going to be a funeral back in Hungary within like the next week, and could she attend it? So Jozsef saw this letter and panicked, thinking that if Maria wanted to go to Hungary to this funeral, she'd want to take Judith with her. And if the two of them had left him, who knows what had happened? Maybe they wouldn't come home. He just didn't want to let them out of his sight, just, you know, to be sure. So he hid this letter from Maria. And I don't know if she ever found out that that family member had passed away and that she'd missed the funeral. Despite her very distressing home life, Judith attended school every single day. She went to a public school, you know, to kind of maintain a normal life and normal friends outside of her job. In school, she would draw happy little pictures of her and her mother playing together, and none of her teachers ever suspected a thing. However, around this stage, Judith's friends were becoming increasingly aware of what was going on, because Judith was quite open about things. I think because she didn't realise that her dad probably didn't want her to tell people. I don't think she realised it was a secret, or that her dad wanted it to be a secret. And so she would tell her friends, like, sometimes my daddy shouts at me and sometimes my daddy throws things at me and my mum. She would tell her friends about one time that he threw pots and pans at her and gave her a bloody nose. And her friends were becoming afraid of her father as well, because they just didn't want to be around him. All these things that Judith was telling them, they just didn't want to be around him. They never wanted to go to her house. They never wanted to, like, knock on the door and see if she was playing out in case her father answered. One of the children that used to play with Judith when they were younger remembers a story of one time she went and knocked on the door and asked if Judith was playing out, and her father answered, and he was drunk and he was making some horrible remarks about Judith, calling her names, and then he was like, she's at a photo shoot, and then just shut the door. And the fact that he was saying things like that about his daughter to another 6, 7, 8-year-old child is just insane. As the months went on, Jozsef's abuse got worse and worse, and the focus was coming more onto Judith as well. Up until now, it had been mainly Maria, mainly his wife. However, it was getting to the point where he was becoming quite physically violent with Judith as well. There was one time where he allegedly threw her to the ground by her hair, like grabbed her ponytail, pulled it, and threw her on the floor and gave her a bloody nose. And to make up for this incident, he allegedly bought her a pink TV to go in her room as like a apology present. One day in 1987, Judith was 9 years old at this point, and she was packing, getting ready to go away to film Jaws the Revenge. Like I said, they were filming that in the Bahamas. It was just going to be her and Maria, that they were going to be gone for a while. I don't know how long they were gone filming for, but it was quite a while. So Judith's getting really excited in her bedroom. She's packing this suitcase full of all her favourite outfits. Meanwhile, Jozsef is getting angry. He storms into this room that Judith is in, packing her case. He slams the door behind him, and then he goes up to his 9-year-old daughter and puts a knife to her throat. And he says to Judith, if you and your mother don't come home after shooting this movie, I'm gonna cut your throat. And then he leaves the room. He threatened his 9-year-old daughter with a knife because he knew that her mother would probably try and escape given any chance. So anyway, Judith and Maria get to the Bahamas. They're having a really great time on the set of this movie. And because Judith is only 9 years old, there's certain rules and laws as to how much acting she can do in one day. She can only do a few hours a day because it is work. It's classed as work, and she's a very young child, so they've only got a few hours on set every day. And so for a lot of the time that they weren't filming, they were just on the beach. They had like a private beach, I think, for all the cast. And Maria was bonding with all these other women on set because she wasn't really around women all that much because she was a stay-at-home mother, so she was enjoying making friends. And she starts opening up to them all about Jozsef and about the abuse and about how she didn't want to go home. She was scared to go back home to him. And at first these women are really concerned for her and they're saying, well, don't go back, like go and start a new life somewhere. You've got your daughter, you've got a suitcase full of things, just go and start a new life. And Maria's like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna do it. But then the next day she's talking about going back to Jozsef again. And this continued every single day. And no matter how much the women supported her and, you know, helped her and tried to help her come up with a plan, it was obvious that Maria was going back to Jozsef. And so before long, these women on the set started to almost ignore what Maria was saying. They would talk to her. They wouldn't like physically ignore her and just not talk to her. But they weren't as concerned because they felt as though it was for attention, because she was just completely disregarding what they were saying to her. One of the women that was on set described it as a very kind of the boy who cried wolf situation. Like, they just felt like before long she was exaggerating, she liked the attention, and they weren't going to give it to her anymore. So none of them realised it was quite as serious as it was, which is so sad to think that she was physically like flat out telling these women what was going on and they were just kind of brushing it off. So because of these fears that Maria was having about going back home to Jozsef, Maria decided that her and Judith would stop off at Maria's brother's house on the way back home. Maria's brother, when he fled Hungary, he went straight to New York, whereas Maria went to LA, so she hadn't seen her brother in a long, long time. I don't think Judith had ever met her uncle, Maria's brother. So they were there for a few days after they came home from the Bahamas, and somehow Jozsef found out. And Jozsef called Maria at this house in New York and asked to speak to Judith. And once she was on the phone to Jozsef, he said something to the effect of, do you remember what I said was going to happen if you didn't come home? And so after this phone call, Judith went and told her mother what her father had done before they left for the Bahamas, and the next day they were on a plane back to LA. At this stage in their relationship, Jozsef actually began seeing other women outside of his marriage. He still wanted Maria, he still wanted his wife at home, but he also wanted his affairs on the side. And he was making these women his girlfriends, not just like sleeping with different women outside of his marriage. He had full-on other girlfriends that he would buy gifts for, he would take places. But he refused to leave Maria, and he told her that she couldn't leave him or he would kill her. So she was forced to stay in this marriage where her husband was being unfaithful, and she decided that she would now try everything in her power to make Jozsef leave her. If she couldn't leave him, she wanted to make him leave her willingly, you know? So Maria stopped caring for herself physically as much. She didn't make herself look pretty all the time like she normally did. She stopped cleaning the house. She stopped tidying up. The house looked disgusting. I've seen videos of it. There was just stuff everywhere, plates everywhere, just a mess. And Maria hoped that it would get to the point where Jozsef just couldn't take living there anymore and that he would maybe move out with his new girlfriend or just at least leave Maria. But none of it worked, and at this point even the neighbours were getting very concerned because they were the people that Maria was closest to, because she wasn't really allowed to leave the house without Jozsef. So she would tell the neighbours certain things and they were very aware that this was not a good home situation, and even the neighbours were offering them like a safe haven at their house. Like they were saying to Maria, if you want to take Judith and hide at our house until you find your own place, you can do that. But Maria declined all the offers. She just wanted to stay there. She wanted to stay at her own house, and she wanted Jozsef to leave off his own accord. And soon this abusive home life was taking a physical toll on little Judith. She began gaining weight. She began pulling her eyelashes out, kind of like a nervous thing. She began pulling the whiskers off her cat. And it got to the point that Judith was auditioning for All Dogs Go to Heaven, a part that she actually got, and she actually starred in that movie. But she was having one of the auditions for it. I think it was a singing audition. And she just breaks down in the middle of this audition, unprovoked. Nothing had happened to make her, start crying. But she did. She started crying. She couldn't speak through her tears. She was hyperventilating. She couldn't get any words out to tell anyone what was wrong. And this doesn't happen to 9-year-old girls very often. Yes, children cry a lot, but not unprovoked, not in the middle of an audition. She'd never done anything like this before. And so her agent, Ruth Hansen, was actually with her at this audition, and she thought something's not right here. Because she'd also noticed that she'd gained weight and that she was like pulling on her eyelashes when she was waiting for her audition and stuff. So she knew that something wasn't right with this child. And so the agent got Judith Barsi in with a child psychologist to see what was going on. And after just 1 hour session with Judith, this child psychologist identified that Judith was a severely physically and mentally abused child. And at the end of the session, they actually got Child Protective Services involved. So Child Protective Services bring Maria in and they're like, look, you've got to tell us what's going on. What's happening to your child? And Maria sat and she told them all of this stuff about Jozsef, and then she was like, but don't worry, I'm gonna divorce Jozsef and I'm gonna move out. I've already got a place for me and Judith to move to as soon as I break up with Jozsef. Maria had actually been renting an apartment for I think a couple of weeks at this point, just a random apartment in a place called Panorama City, and she'd been taking Judith there during the day when she hadn't had work or school or auditions or anything. They would tell Jozsef that they were busy with some kind of audition or some kind of work, and she would just take Judith there just for kind of a safe haven during the day, somewhere that they could both go and not be around Jozsef. Jozsef didn't know that any of this was going on. In the evenings, they would go home to Jozsef and live life as if nothing had happened, you know? And Maria just basically said to the kind of social worker, she was like, look, I've got this place that me and Judith are ready to move into. I just need to start the divorce proceedings. So the social worker believed her. She believed that Maria was going to follow through with her word, and she dropped Judith's case. Now, there's been a lot of debate about whether this social worker should have dropped the case or not, but just for some background information, this particular social worker was very, very over capacity with the amount of cases that they actually had at that time. So I think the maximum amount of cases that a social worker was supposed to have in this particular time or whatever was 50. And this person had 67 cases. So of course they're trying to get rid of 17 cases as quickly as they can so that they can give all the other ones like more attention. And when a parent of a child is physically renting another place and saying, look, take my word for it, I'm going to divorce this man, we're going to move into this place, it looks as though Maria is putting the steps in place to get Judith to safety. And so this social worker believed her and dropped the case. Everyone's going to have their own opinions on that. Feel free to talk about it in the comments, but that's what happened, and Child Protective Services were no longer involved with Judith Barsi. Everyone close to Maria was urging her and encouraging her to go through with this plan, to divorce Jozsef, to go to this flat and start a new life, just her and Judith. And so Maria was ready, she was thinking about doing it and everything, and she begins packing up stuff at their house to take to this new flat. She wanted to do it like bit by bit so that Jozsef didn't notice things in the house going missing. So on this particular day, July 10th of 1988, Maria is packing some boxes, putting them in her car, and she sets off to the apartment in Panorama City to go and drop them off. However, this time Jozsef follows her there. When they got there, Maria got out of the car, she began taking these boxes inside, and Jozsef comes out of his car and confronts her and he's like, what the hell are you doing? Where is this? Like, what are all these boxes? And Maria is able to quickly calm him down, and she says, oh no, I'm just helping my friend move. Like, these are her boxes, they've been in my car for a while, I was just bringing them here, I was going to leave them here for her to take inside. And luckily Jozsef believed it, and they were both able to go home and everything was fine, and he never found out about the apartment. However, at this point Jozsef knew where this apartment was. Like, if suddenly Maria and Judith went missing, he would probably go straight there because he would still have his suspicions about that. So now Maria felt like her plan was partly foiled, and she would tell that to the friends and family that were encouraging her to go through with it, and they were like, just do it anyway, or just get a different apartment or whatever. And she was now having a change of heart, was Maria, about this whole situation, because she was thinking if she divorces Jozsef, then he gets to keep all their assets. He will keep the 3-bedroom house when she wanted the 3-bedroom house. Now, I don't want to talk badly about Maria here, but her priorities seem to be in a very questionable place. She didn't want to leave Jozsef and take Judith to safety because she wanted the big house. And she wanted all the jewellery and all stuff like that that, you know, Judith's jobs had paid for. I can understand wanting the house. I can understand not wanting to go and live in a tiny apartment when Judith had earned that house. She'd earned all the money to buy that house. But if your daughter's life and your life are at risk, but like even Maria's friends were saying, come on, you've got to do what's right for Judith. And they were wondering why Maria was so concerned with all these materialistic possessions rather than her daughter's safety. But of course she isn't to blame for anything that we are about to talk about, because she never could have guessed what was going to happen. Around this point in the case, Judith had begun going to a family friend's house. She would like cycle there almost every single day. She would spend hours there at a time. She would eat food there and stuff. And I think this family friend, it was a couple, I think they kind of knew what was going on at home, and they didn't mind Judith spending so much time at their house because they knew what she was going through at home. And so if Judith wanted to spend 4 hours there every night, they were letting her because they wanted her to have that time away from Jozsef. But on this one particular night in July of 1988, she told this couple that she didn't want to go home. She was scared to go home because Daddy always threatens to kill Mummy. And these family friends were very concerned about this, but at the same time, they, as everyone else did, they thought that those words were kind of empty, angry, exaggerated threats. And it was the same with Jozef's friends as well. They would do the same thing. So Jozsef had this friend called Peter that he was particularly close to, and he would say to Peter all the time, like, I'm gonna kill Maria, I'm gonna kill Maria one day. And Peter, of course, didn't think that he was being serious. He didn't think that he was actually gonna kill her. And so sometimes he would try and challenge this thought process and be like, well, if you did that, what would happen to the little one? Meaning Judith. And Jozsef would say, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to kill her too. So Judith Eva Barsi's final acting role was as the voice of Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven, which was actually directed by the same man that directed The Land Before Time, where Judith voiced Ducky. I have a quote from the director of those films. He was called Don Bluth. He said, "She was absolutely astonishing. She understood verbal direction, even for the most sophisticated situations." And he said that he had plans to cast Judith as, you know, other roles in his upcoming projects, because he believed in her so much, and because she had so much talent, and because she was just such a natural little star. On June 6th, 1988, Judith Eva Barsi turned 10 years old, and they had a little bit of a party at their house, and her mother was there, her father was there, other family members were there. Over the next month or so, the weather was amazing in LA. It was the middle of summer and it was just always really sunny. And so Judith was out on her bike all the time. She was out in the sprinklers with her friend, like I said. She just spent a lot of time outside playing. On July 25th of 1988, the neighbours saw little 10-year-old Judith Barsi playing outside on her little pink bike, and she was having the time of her life in the sunshine. And then that evening, Maria puts Judith to bed. Maria goes to bed herself and leaves Jozsef in the living room just drinking, watching TV. This happened most nights. However, this night was very different. Jozsef waited until he was sure that Maria and Judith were both asleep, and then he goes to the closet in his bedroom where he keeps his guns. He gets out a .32 caliber pistol and sets off to Judith's room. She was peacefully asleep in her bed when Jozsef crept in the room, pointed the gun right at her head, and shot her, killing her instantly in her sleep. Now this gunshot woke Maria up, and she got up straight away. She knew exactly what that sound was, and she ran out of her room, ran into the hallway, and by then Jozsef had come out of Judith's room and he was making his way to her. They met in the hallway and there was some kind of struggle, and she was probably trying to like push past him to get to Judith's room, and he was trying to push her on the floor, and eventually he got her on the floor and shot Maria in the head as well, killing her instantly. Now for the next 2 days, Jozsef Barsi continued life as normal in this house without telling anyone what had happened, without even so much as moving the bodies. He left one body in Judith's bedroom and one body in the hallway and just lived his life. The following morning, Judith was actually supposed to be at a recording session for All Dogs Go to Heaven. And of course, when she didn't turn up, the studio got in contact with her agent and they were like, where's Judith? So Ruth calls the Barsi household, and of course Joseph picks up the phone and he says a black car came and picked up Judith and Maria earlier that day, but he didn't know where they were going or what it was for, and that he'd actually moved out of the house now, but he just came back to say goodbye to his baby girl. On the morning of July 27th, 1988, so remember the murders happened on July 25th, so this is 2 days later. One of the Barsi's neighbours, called Eunice, was actually out in her garden that morning watering her plants at about 7:30 in the morning when she hears an explosion, and it seems to be coming from the Barsi household. So she calls 911, and by the time she gets off of that phone call, she looks over at the Barsi house and she sees smoke billowing out of the windows already. And so she does what she can. Eunice is quite an old woman, and she does what she can with her garden hose, trying to put out this fire that is coming out of the house. Eventually the fire department get there and they put out this fire, and the firefighters go inside to assess the situation. Inside the house, firefighters found 3 dead bodies. The body of Judith, aged 10, the body of Maria, aged 48, and the body of Joseph, aged 55. So from crime scene evidence, it was clear that gasoline had been used to create this fire. There was gasoline residue all over both women's bodies. There was a gasoline cap found just a few feet away from Judith's body, so it seemed like he'd taken off the cap and started there. The explosion that Eunice had heard that morning actually turned out to have been a gunshot rather than an explosion. It was Jozsef Barsi taking his own life with that same .32 caliber pistol that he'd used to kill his wife and daughter. So the next morning, the news broke that this rising star, Judith Barsi, had been murdered by her own father. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this was a huge story. This was big, big news. Judith Barsi herself wasn't necessarily a celebrity, but the things that she'd been in, the shows and the films and stuff, they were all very famous stuff. And so when the news broke that this little girl that starred in all of these household names had been murdered, you know, it was really, really big news and everyone was talking about it. And one of the things that all these news articles were clinging to that is actually really eerie in retrospect is the first TV show that Judith ever starred in. It was called Fatal Vision. And Fatal Vision was based on a real true crime story of a man named Jeffrey R. McDonald, who was a US Army soldier who murdered his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. And Judith Barsi played one of his 2 daughters. It's just a very sad foreshadowing of what was to become of her own life and her own death. Surprisingly, Judith and Maria Barsi didn't have headstones for their graves for 16 years. They were just buried in unmarked graves for 16 years. That was until 2004 when fans of Judith and just true crime enthusiasts in general all crowdfunded enough money, enough donations to get the 2 girls headstones for their graves. So now the 2 of them have nice little engraved headstones. They're in adjoining plots in this cemetery. It's a nicer ending than what was for 16 years. The last film that Judith ever starred in, like I said, was All Dogs Go to Heaven. However, unfortunately, she never got to see that film because it was released in the November after she passed away. But the credits song for that movie is named Love Survives, and it was actually written for and dedicated to Judith.
Now I know you're safe here in my heart. You will always be with me. We'll never be apart.
Of course, in the aftermath of this case, Child Protective Services had a lot to answer for. Like, why was Judith's case dropped so easily? Why was that social worker so overworked? Like, how was that allowed to happen, that they were just dropping cases that they were only just taking on? Of course, there's not much that they can do. If there aren't enough social workers to take on the work, then they've got to kind of do stuff like that. It was just kind of a big wake-up call as to how they should go about dropping cases. There should probably be more clearer guidelines in terms of that. Of course, it wasn't the social worker's fault. Of course, it was no one's fault. No one was supposed to know that this was going to happen. In fact, this case is one of the very few examples where everyone did everything right, almost. You know, Maria was telling people about the abuse. Child Protective Services were brought in. Like, people were aware that this was going on, yet somehow this still happened. Just a little fact to end this video on: the house that the murder-suicide took place in was actually repaired after the fire. It was repainted and everything, and now there's a new family living in there. After I finished filming and editing this video, I actually came across this article that says that the family that moved into the Barsi house actually claim that it's haunted. Whether you believe in the paranormal and ghosts and stuff like that is, you know, your choice to make, but I just thought it was interesting to put this in the video. The family claimed that they had no idea of the history of the house, they had no idea who it belonged to, they had no idea that there was 2 murders and a suicide that took place there, and they claimed that ever since they moved in, they just felt this really dark presence, and they would feel cold spots around the house, and the garage door would open and close by itself. Specifically, the father of the family, whenever he's in this one specific hallway, he always feels like someone is stood behind him, which is especially interesting because that's where Maria was killed. And like I said, they had no idea of the history of the house until one day one of the members of the family was speaking to the neighbours, and they were telling them all these weird things that were going on in the house, and the neighbour was like, well, you do know what happened in that house before you moved in. And then that is how they learnt of the double murder suicide. So whether you believe all that or not is completely up to you. I just thought it was quite interesting to put in here. But yeah, that completes this case. That is everything I have on this one. Subscribe down below if you want to see some more like this. I'm always uploading new case videos, so thank you so much to all of my channel members on both tier 1 and tier 2 for their support with the channel. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! Love survives.